All right, gang, let's get going. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. What? Happy for clean, wet air. Yeah. Yeah, it's you can feel the transition into fall here, can you? Can y'all hear me if I just talk like this? Yeah.
Probably okay. Can they hear you online?
That's my question, yeah. Actually, I think they can. Can you guys hear me at home?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So welcome. This is the September meeting. Yes. Thank you of Central Oregon Writers Guild. We have Jennifer Perrine is going to talk to us tonight. I'm going to go quickly through our website, which I'm not sharing. Am I? Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Zoom. Oh, for goodness sake, here.
The old one. When it's there, I'll share.
How do I how do I get back to the Zoom? To share.
Yeah, now click share in the middle, otherwise. And then click my hand time.
Okay. All right, now I'm sharing, right? You are sharing. Okay. Okay, so I was just asked about the Central Oregon Writers Guild anthology release. Do you know the date of that, Mary?
I don't know it offhand.
It's, I think, in November, and I should put it on the website.
Launch is gonna be November 13th.
November 13th will be the launch. So we should have them for the November meeting. We'll have books available to buy here for the November meeting. Okay, on the left side of the screen are the events, the Central Oregon Writers Guild events. So there's Jennifer that we're going to see tonight. There's also Jennifer. Wave, Jennifer. There she is. And Jennifer is doing a workshop on Saturday. So, and there's still room for it. 1 to 4 Saturday here in this room. Contents under pressure, using constraints to stretch your creativity. And she's going to talk about form and constraints tonight. I was having a conversation with a couple of people about that this morning. One of the cool things about that is that how many of you have a self-editor? Anyone? Just 2? Yeah. Everyone has a self-editor. So sometimes I mean, I don't know if there's any truth to the left brain, right brain thing, but sometimes our left brains and right brains have a challenge talking to each other, and it manifests on the page, or doesn't manifest on the page in some cases, right? Constraints are kind of cool because you can tell the left brain to shut up, because it's like, okay, we'll follow this form, right? And then it gives us some freedom. So I know that Jennifer is going to tell us some great stuff tonight, and we'll be doing some really cool stuff on Saturday. So sign up. The COWG workshops, because of a grant that we get from Deschutes County, and because of your dues, we keep our COWG workshop prices down to $10 per person for a 3-hour workshop, which you will never find anywhere else in the entire world. Okay, so they're really worthwhile. I mean, it's not like it's a $10 workshop, but it's only going to cost you $10. So like I said, there's still room to come see Jennifer on Saturday too. October, we have Deborah Fraze coming. November, Sherry Kephart is going to do our meeting and our final workshop of the year. And then we have our holiday potluck and member reading in December. right side of the screen, we have everything that we know of that's going on in Central Oregon as far as writing. And if you know of something that isn't on here, email Central Oregon Writers Guild at gmail.com. Let us know and we'll put it on there. I just overheard Becca saying that they're going to do so. We're doing quiet writing in the Meyer classroom upstairs Tuesday mornings, 9:30 to 11. At least 2 people in this room were with me up there this morning. And that it sounds like you're going to start doing them at Sisters and Redmond libraries too.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, December. Sisters is Thursday from 10:30 to noon. Redmond is Tuesdays from 10 to 11.
And that starts in December. Okay. And then also just reminded that the library is going to close down for remodeling in January. So we'll be shifting where we have our meeting. We'll figure that out. We'll keep you posted. Okay. What else here? Okay, so September events. There's Jennifer. Karina is super busy this month. She's got all kinds of cool stuff going on. Tomorrow. So Joe Marich, I think I mentioned this last time, but Joe Marich is going to join us next year. He is a promotion, what am I, a publicist. And I talked with him for about an hour on the phone or on the Zoom one day, and he has all kinds of cool stuff. So this is an online Zoom meeting that he's having there. Really worthwhile, even if you don't have a book to promote, really worthwhile just to find out some stuff. So I encourage you to Zoom into that. A couple of author readings. PNWA conference starts this week. Sisters
Festival of Books.
Sisters Festival of Books.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Is there anyone here from Sisters who will be going back to Sisters tonight?
I'm gonna go next week. Yeah, I'll take a flyer. Yeah. Sisters Festival of Books is great. If you click on that, you'll find out all the cool stuff that's going on up there. There's Jennifer's workshop for Saturday. Raging Writers Spoken Words. Talked about this before. That's second Sundays at Spork. Writing prompts, community writing, and then followed by a spoken word. You don't have to read what you wrote or what you brought, but that option is there for you. I think, and this is getting pretty close, I think there's still some room in the Lost in Place Nature Writing Intensive. That's, I think, out at Summer Lake with Ellen Waterston. And that is one of the events that we are offering scholarship money for. So if you are interested in doing that and want to apply for a scholarship, we probably want to get on those scholarship things pretty quick. Trish and I talked about the scholarships for the conferences, and I'll put some flyers on the back table there, and I've sent out a few emails, and I'll send more emails out. But the scholarship applications for the conference, Writers Conference, are due September 15th is what we're saying. Okay, so get those in. Several people have applied already for those, so get those in and convince Trish and Michael and the directors of that program why you should get a free ride to that event. Open mic, third Thursday spoken word at Redmond and Bend here. Local author Saturday on September 20th at Roundy Butt Books. I think there's at least 4 local authors there that day. Blank Pages Writing Salon, that's something that my wife and I do. It's online, Zoom in. We usually will send out a prompt. If you're not on our mailing list, just email me and I'll put you on the mailing list. We send out a prompt, people share a couple of pages, and we just wildly applause and tell you how great it is, and then we go to the next person. So it's just a nice place to share some work. And we've been doing that for over 10 years. And
Simplifying it though, because you do talk about the work and what
Yeah.
people did. I mean, I learned a lot when I haven't done it since you've been doing it online. I did it live,
yeah,
but it was just really, I feel like
Those are free and it's a way for you to get to know them because they have a really good writing program and also you just learn a lot having that experience with other people reading, so.
Yeah.
I just wanted
Yeah,
that.
I think, again, reading with other people is a fantastic thing. Poetry night at Lone Pine. Another one of Karina's things there, the Secret Self Speaks. This is, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on her name, and I'm just going to click on it now. Jessica Hills, this is a year-long guided cohort for memoirists. That starts pretty soon, I think. Yeah, it starts on that day. If you're interested in that, that's another one of the ones that we're offering scholarships for. So check that one out. Herringbone is doing a book fest in September up in Redmond there. And then this was the writing program that Trish just mentioned, the Forge 10-month online creative writing program with myself, my wife, Irene, and Ellen Santasero. We do have room left in that. That's a 10-month program. If you're interested in that, come talk to me. I'm happy to share it. You might say, I'm not ready for that, or I don't know what it is, or whatever it is that's holding you back from being the greatest writer that you want to be. But come talk to me, and this one is also available for scholarships too. Kat Mattingly's doing a class. I don't know. September 30th through November 4th, getting published, and then October events up here as well. Aaron McAllister is a recent graduate of the OSU Cascades MFA program, and she co-taught a class with me, and she's really good. So if you're up Redmond Way, I would highly recommend that. Kat's doing a novel memoir writing program up at Redmond. Yeah, so on and so forth. Okay, lots of stuff in here. Again, being part of that community, it helps us with our writing. Again, I've said this time and time again. It's a solo act, and sometimes can get pushed to the side. It's nice to be in community because that helps support us and keep us going in that idea. Any questions or announcements about anything?
I had a letter to the editor in this week's source.
So you're published,
That's right.
published author. Yeah, nice. Great. Anybody else? No?
That is an easy place to get published, by the way.
Okay. So
I think I'm just gonna skip it.
we're gonna skip it. Okay. So our featured reader didn't make it tonight. So sorry. So we're gonna, Jennifer, are you ready? If we start you earlier? Okay. All right. Then we're gonna bring Jennifer on early. So Jennifer. Jennifer, somebody just said you're even prettier than your picture.
Thanks. It's very kind.
And it's a good picture. All right, Jennifer Perrine, JP, is the author of 5 award-winning books of poetry, including their latest collection, Beautiful Outlaw. Their other recent writing appears in Best Small Fictions, A Mouth Holds Many Things, a Decanon hybrid lit collection, and Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, and Poetry. Jennifer lives in Portland, and she's gonna, like I said, she's Zooming with us tonight, but she'll be in person with us on Saturday, and there is room. And Jennifer, I'm just gonna let you take it from here. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for inviting me to join y'all today. I'm really honored to be here virtually with y'all. So my name is Jennifer. Most people in my life know me as JP. So when we get to the Q&A portion of the evening, or if I see you on Saturday, please feel free to call me JP. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience writing in form, and we'll have some time to try out a couple of formal constraints, and then there should be plenty of time at the end for Q&A. But I'm going to start by taking us back about 5 years to 2020 and 2021, which was when most of my recent book of poetry, Beautiful Outlaw, was written. And at the time, I, maybe like many of you, was kind of a mess. I felt pretty profoundly isolated by the COVID pandemic. I was enraged by and afraid of the xenophobia and racist violence I was witnessing in my neighborhood and throughout the country. And I'd also experienced this string of personal losses. So my mother, who I'd been estranged from for many years, had died just before the pandemic began. My job ended a few months after that, and then a relationship that I'd been in for a decade ended soon after that. So there was a lot going on, and I wanted to write about all of these things, but sort of like what Mike alluded to, my brain would not let me write about them because I felt so emotionally overwhelmed. Each of those things was so enormous in its pain that I couldn't really even bear to think about any of them for very long, let alone write about them. Um, but fortunately, what I did have was a kind of support system in poetic constraints. So you might say that I'd become friends with poetic constraints about 20 years earlier when I was in graduate school, where I had the good fortune to take a class with the poet Sonia Sanchez. And for a whole semester, she asked us to write only in received forms. So things like sonnets and villanelles and ballads and haiku. And initially, I really bucked against those assignments. At the time, I was, in my 20s, and I felt like those assignments were stifling my creativity and they were imposing limitations on me and depriving me somehow of my super special uniqueness by doing something that someone else had already done and that maybe thousands of people had
Hang on
already
one
done.
second, Jennifer, we lost your voice.
Oh, uh-oh.
Is there a?
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like folks on Zoom can hear me, but maybe not in the room.
She's back up on the screen. Thank God they're gonna model their library.
But really though.
All right, you want to try
You wanna
putting
try
it
it? I don't know if you got it.
Is it turned?
Someone in this is maybe just for the Zoom folks who can hear me. I'm assuming folks in the library can't hear me now. Somebody said to tell a joke while we wait. I heard a,
Oh, we heard you for a second.
oh, okay.
Let's see. Speaker. Let's try it. Yeah.
I
Okay, try
work
again,
for the
Jennifer.
Parks and Nature Department here and work with somebody who's cultivates fungi, and we were picking out containers to grow the fungi, and he said, what size containers do we need for this fungi? And someone else said, I don't know, but they need as much room as possible to grow. That's my really
We got
terrible
that.
judgment for today.
That was good for the interim joke. All
Are
right,
we back on in the room? Okay. Thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties and for the silly joke to tide us over. Okay, what was the last thing that you all heard in the room?
Stifled?
Okay.
You're feeling stifled.
You were
Okay.
rebelling against.
Perfect. Okay. So I was in this class in grad school where we were asked to write only in poetic form. I was feeling stifled because I thought, entering into this tradition that hundreds of thousands of people have already written in this form, how is that unique or creative at all? Um, but of course, Sonia Sanchez, the instructor for that course, was much wiser than I was. And so over the course of a few months, I learned that writing in receive forms actually made me more creative because I couldn't rely on my habits anymore. So, like certain words that I tended to use over and over without realizing it, usually, I had to work with a rhyme scheme that stretched me to use words that I might ordinarily not. Um, and so those forms, they also weren't limiting. They were kind of full of discovery because I would go in trying to approach a poem, say maybe a poem about my family from a certain angle, but I would realize that wouldn't work with maybe the meter of the received form. So I had to search and find another angle altogether that I probably wouldn't have even imagined otherwise. And so even if I was the, millionth person to write a sonnet, because I was writing into this long tradition, it also offered me the opportunity to speak back to other parts of that tradition that I was critical of. Like, for instance, in the sonnet tradition, there's a lot of objectification of women. So that was this new way of entering into that form. So by 2020, I'd become pretty well acquainted with poetic formal constraint and all the things that it had to offer. And I'd really embraced it by that point. I'd written books where I'd included pantoums and huzzles and acrostics and haibun and lots of other forms from around the world. Um, and in the books that I'd written, even when I wasn't using receive forms, I tended to use nonce forms, so constraints that I created specifically for a particular, need or challenge or occasion. So, for example, I'd written poems with lines of a certain syllable count that would mimic the length of what I could speak with a really short panicked breath or with a deep easeful breath to kind of conjure those different emotional and physical states. Or I'd invented a rhyme scheme that would create echoes of connection between parts of a poem that were really physically very far apart to as a way of kind of addressing some of the complexities of feeling attached, feeling a kind of echo of connection to people who I was really physically distant from. So I was kind of a devotee of poetic form. And there were two main reasons why. And one is the craft piece. So as a writer and a writing teacher, and I think even as a human, I've experienced and witnessed the choice paralysis that can come from limitless options. The kind of overwhelm that comes with the blank page. And if there are too many different routes that I can take, I might not ever take any. And so constraints feel like they give me some guideposts that help me know where to begin. And sometimes the metaphor I think of for this is the blank page feels like walking through a desert or like a huge snow-covered field that just expands endlessly to the horizon where you can keep walking and walking and walking and putting in so much effort, but it's really easy to get disoriented and not even know which direction you're headed in, let alone if it's the right direction. And so I think of constraints as more like walking through a really well-tended forest where there's already some clearly defined paths and even maybe some fenced off areas that kind of tell you here are the possible routes through and here are the boundaries you're not supposed to cross. And because someone's come that way before, or if we're, kind of expanding this metaphor to talk about nonce forms, in that case, maybe you're the one who's created a map for yourself before embarking on this adventure. So that when you get to this forest, you might have some help in choosing which direction to start walking in. And then if you're not enjoying the route that you've taken, maybe you alter the form or you abandon the form. So you choose a different trail or you go off trail or you hop the fence. But at least you've made a start and you're not still staring at that snow-covered field and just panicking about, trying to figure out which way north is. So that's one piece is the craft piece. And then the other piece that I really love about form is I think of it as the human or animal or embodied aspect of writing. there are so many things that I write about and that I think a lot of us write about that can be really painful or upsetting or even re-traumatizing to hold in our body as we write about them. And so I think we often write about these things because they're so painful, because we want to put them into language to help make sense of them for ourselves and for each other. But making sense means that we have to remain in our senses. And if our body is in a state of fight or flight or freeze or etc., that's our body trying to flee our senses. But if you're using a form, especially a really complicated form, it can give our mind something to do while we're experiencing those really strong emotions or those really strong physical sensations, so that we're more likely to stay present in our bodies and in our senses. And that ultimately, I think, helps us to write well and to name these things that feel kind of nearly unspeakable that we tend to want so desperately to name. So I mentioned very complicated forms, and that's what really provided me a kind of refuge in 2020 and 2021 when so much of my life felt so chaotic, and I think felt chaotic for so many people. And because I'd been writing in form so long at that point, I felt like I'd become pretty comfortable with, even forms that I once found difficult. And so now I needed to find something that felt almost impossible. And this is when I became acquainted with the beautiful outlaw. So this is a form from the Oulipo tradition. And if you're not familiar with Oulipo, it's a French acronym, and pardon my terrible pronunciation, but it stands for Ouvroir de littérature potentielle, which means workshop of potential literature. So it was this group that was founded in around 1960 by mostly French writers and mathematicians who were working together to create artistic works that used constrained writing techniques. So they were really people after my own heart who thought that creating these new structures and patterns could lead to more enjoyment and more inspiration for writers and for other artists. So they created this particular formal constraint called the beautiful outlaw, which, as far as I can tell, it mostly existed in theory as a concept invented by this group in the 60s, but not really practiced by anyone the way, say, like sonnets and villanelles have been for hundreds of years. So I was introduced to the beautiful outlaw by the poet Miller Oberman, who is an editor at Broadsided Press. And early in the pandemic, Miller put out a call through the press inviting people to write and send poems in this form. And I took the bait. So here's how the form works. I'll explain it and then I'll show you an example to help you get a better sense of it. So in each stanza of the beautiful outlaw, there is one letter that must be excluded, so it cannot be used at all. But all of the other letters of the alphabet must be used in that stanza. And then when you take all of the missing letters from each stanza together, they spell out the title of the poem. So that can be a little bit hard to wrap your head around as a concept. So I'm going to read one poem from the book, Beautiful Outlaw, and I'll share it on the screen here as well. I know you may not be able to read it in the room, I'm not sure, but I think at least people in Zoom will be able to see it in action. Pull it up here for you. All right. Can everyone see this okay? Yes. Okay, great. So just to kind of give you a sense here before I actually read the poem. So this poem is called Sickness. That's the title. This is a broadside that was made of the poem by Broadsided Press. So they've added artwork. But essentially, again, in this form, in the first stanza, there are no S's. In the second stanza, there's no I's, then no C's, no K's, etc. But in every stanza, you're going to find the X's and Q's and Z's and other letters that are kind of less commonly used because they have to be included. So I'm going to read the poem and then talk about it a little bit more. Sickness. We never married, thought it too quaint, too ball and chain, fixed, pinned. We rejected being yoked like oxen, caged together in that hallowed zoo. And yet we dreamt of a honeymoon. Every place we'd explore, were money no object. North and south of the equator, shore to shore, dozens of state parks. For now, you go as far as your job at the hospital, despite my qualms, for the hazard pay. Home at night, you wear a mask, I wear gloves. This is our latex without sex. This is love in a time when every blush conjures fever, when we quiz each other after each cough. I examine your hands, count as you soap them before we touch. For better or worse, we cozy together to wait for the latest dispatch. I exhaust myself with updates, jerk awake hours later. You've covered me with a quilt from your glory box. I find you gazing out a dark window, watching your ghost in glass vanish at civil dawn. I join you, squint to catch that phantom us wearing a gown, a tux. No father gave you away, no mother arranged my veil, no frenzied crowd jockeyed for the bouquet. The rice unthrown we keep in the cupboard. We keep our extravaganza a private joy. We keep each quiet vow in the mouth to have and hold for richer and poorer now and in health. So that is an example of the beautiful outlaw. And that was the very first beautiful outlaw that I wrote. And after learning about this form, I became so obsessed with it that I wrote maybe a dozen or so more of them, most of which made it into the book. And I really adored this form because it is an exceptional form for grief, because there is a literal absence in the poem, all those missing letters. And grief was, I think, what I was most profoundly feeling at that time. And it was the most difficult thing for me to put into language. And this form is so nearly impossible that it kept me from being trapped in my feelings. And instead, I really had to work with the tools at hand and to find a bunch of words that, for instance, have an X in them but no E, and then choose one of those words and write towards it and discover what that will allow me to say, and then to assess, is that thing that I'm saying true? And if so, I can keep going down that path. And if not, I have to choose another word and try another path. And so obviously I adore this particular constraint so much that I named my book after it. And I wanted to invite you all into this wonder that I have found in this form. But I also don't necessarily suggest that you begin with it straight away, because it can take many hours to write one of these, and we only have an hour or so together. So instead, I thought I would invite everyone to try the lipogram, which is a building block of the beautiful outlaw. So if you're not familiar with the lipogram, it's a text that excludes one or more letters of the alphabet. It's from the Greek words lipo, to leave out, and gramma, meaning letter. So unlike the beautiful outlaw, you're not thinking at all about trying to include all of those letters. You're only thinking about the exclusion of one or more of them. And if you're interested in seeing what lipograms look like taken to really extreme lengths, I recommend George Perec has a novel called Avoid, which is an entire novel written with no E, which is an amazing feat, and it was translated from French into English, and that one also had no E. And Christian Book is a poet who also has a book of poetry called Eunoia, which has 5 different sections, and each of those sections uses only one vowel, and so it excludes all of the other vowels. So also quite the feat. But we're going to try today kind of starting with the basics. So I'm going to give us a little bit of space to write, and I'll give us a couple of different prompts to try out with these lipograms to see, if there's a particular one that you feel more drawn to. So I'm going to give us 2 minutes to just write a single sentence. And for this first one, I'm going to suggest leaving out the letter N as in Nancy. And if you don't know what you want your sentence to be about, you can write about something that you experienced today before we gathered here together. So feel free to ask questions in the chat if you're on Zoom, or to ask questions in the room. But I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. Try writing a single sentence that has no ends in it. Okay. Hopefully that all gave you a sense of what it's like to work with that letter, which from my experience is a moderately easy one to leave out. I'm going to offer another prompt again for 2 minutes, which is to write a single sentence, leaving out the letter E. So you can continue maybe the story of what you were writing before, but with no E in it. Okay, so probably the E was a little bit more difficult. I'm gonna offer one more version of the lipogram to try, so you can either keep going with the same kind of story or mini essay that you were writing, or you can try something new. But this time we'll try for just a few minutes longer, maybe 4 minutes, to see how far you can get with it. And with this one, um, try leaving out the letter S. So S should be a little bit easier than E, a little bit harder than N, um, just to get a feel for where it pushes you if you cannot use the letter S. So I'll set another timer for about 4 minutes, see how far you can get with that. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a chance to explore whether that particular limitation, that constraint, gets in the way of your writing or your storytelling or pushes you towards a different path. I wanted to give us just a couple of minutes to share with each other if you'd like. So folks in the Zoom room can drop in the chat, maybe a favorite sentence out of what you wrote, or just a thought or a perspective that came up for you as you were trying out these different lipograms. And in the room, if you want to turn to somebody next to you and just share, again, maybe a favorite sentence or what you noticed as you were writing, we'll just take maybe 3 minutes to kind of share with each other. And then I'll talk about some other constraints.
Well, the first line is, well, that was, the first line is outstanding. About my journey to market. So right, I see email that, just and then the next one is about the, how do I spy my phone without the top, my brother, the last one. Yeah, that one shot to my, so yeah, I'm in place to share. No, I like this. Like, really like this. It was weird, but it was. I know what. Yeah, she is really like, yeah. Yeah, I did this. Real parody. I don't know. I was six, left out the net. I got high. Yeah, go pay for it. I want to say, okay.
Okay. For folks in the room, if you want to wrap up, we'll come back together.
No, I know, I crossed the house, I felt like it's what he did. Yeah, just say, where I was, checklists, place to place. Perfect thing or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have one question, because so that's like, I've been trying to. I'm sure I've been.
Ready?
Can folks in the room hear me? In the library?
You ready for us to come back from,
Yes, please.
okay, all right.
Okay.
We're gonna resume, talking, so.
All right. So I'm glad that it sounds like there was lots generated there, lots of excitement and or frustration. I was checking in a little bit with the folks in the Zoom room, and some people thought it was fun that it like made their phrases more interesting because they couldn't use the first word that came to mind. Some people also said, you know, it was challenging and I did not enjoy it. I felt like this was, you know, it felt like hitting a wall instead of feeling like giving me, you know, an obstacle that I could go around and find a different path. And I think both of those things can be very true, right? And so just from this short taste, you might get that feel for how lipograms can help us to maybe consider some of the choices that we have as writers, particularly around word choice, diction, tone. I think it's really helped me, even if it doesn't produce a piece of writing that I love, it's helped me understand how what words I tend to be drawn to, and also maybe certain sounds that I tend to avoid, or certain letters I tend to avoid sort of unconsciously, and asked me to kind of be more conscious about them. If you were one of those people who tried this and thought like, wow, this is not for me, when it comes to form, I will stick to sonnets. That is also great. My goal is not to get every poet to write a beautiful outlaw, but to invite us all to experiment with lots of different constraints and to be unafraid to invent our own just to see what that feels like. So if maybe something like a sonnet feels more comfortable to you, maybe what stretches you towards, creative growth isn't another form altogether, but adding another layer to a form that you already know pretty well. So I'm going to share in relationship to the sonnet, which is another form that I've loved and have worked in for a much longer time. There's this creative practice or game called bourrime, and that's another French word, which means rhymed ends. And it's bourrime. It was said to have been invented by this poet named Dulot in the 17th century, and it became this really popular practice among poets throughout, pretty much the 18th and 19th centuries. And so essentially, this is how it works. You create a list of 7 rhyming pairs of words. Traditionally they were exact rhymes, but they could be also be like near rhymes or sight rhymes. And then you take those 7 pairs of rhyming words and you swap them with somebody else who's also created a list of rhyming words. And then you create a sonnet so that each line ends with the words that were given to you, and the ones that you give to somebody else, they write towards those end words in their sonnet. And of course, the challenge is to try to create a poem that makes some kind of sense. And the stranger the bunch of words is, the more challenging it can be to make a sensible poem or a poem that feels meaningful to you. But it is possible. So this is a practice that I used for some of the poems when I wrote my first book, where I exchanged rhymes with a friend. And it helped me to kind of unlock some ways of writing about experiences that felt maybe not as emotionally charged as the ones that I was talking about with this more recent book, but ones that I just had trouble putting into language. And more recently, I still use this bourrime practice, but I've kind of expanded my notion of who my friends or collaborators that I'm trading end rhymes with are. So now I've been borrowing the end rhymes of Shakespeare's sonnets and using those as my end rhymes to see, how can those end rhymes kind of travel across time? What comes up for me in a really different, lived experience, add or change to writing those towards those end rhymes. So I really enjoy this form because maybe it's different than just a receive form where you're inheriting this long tradition, or a nonce form where you're blazing your own trail. I feel like something like a bourrime, these collaborative forms involve trusting kind of just one other person to guide you. You're asking somebody to come up with a constraint for you, and you're seeing what it feels like to try on something that someone else has imposed on you, but where you also have the freedom to say, no, actually, I don't love that. And I think that's really the beauty of constraints, is that you do actually have the freedom to opt out if it feels like it's leading you in the wrong direction, because you can always alter the rules of the game. You can say to the guide, thank you, but no thank you. And I find that that's useful for me because it helps me to notice when I'm maybe very uncomfortable because the constraint is so difficult, but I'm also still excited or interested or curious in some way about where it might lead, versus when I cross over into something that's not just discomfort, but I start to say something that I don't mean, or I feel like there's no joy in writing about it in that way that the constraint is forcing me to. And I think that noticing where that tipping point is a skill that can be carried over into all kinds of writing, whether it's constrained or not, or collaborative or not. So in the spirit of, experimentation and trust and kind of noticing where that tipping point is, I'm going to invite us to write one more time, this time to try that bourrime. So first you'll write 7 pairs of rhyming words. And I would suggest not overthinking them, just use the first 7 pairs that come to your mind. So if you're online, you can drop those in the chat. You can maybe put all 7 pairs in one message, and then you'll choose somebody else's set to write a sonnet using those as the end rhymes. And if you're in person, you can maybe hopefully write them on a piece of scrap paper and swap with somebody next to you. And then once you have your 14 words, I don't know that you'll write an entire sonnet in the time that we have, but you'll start writing that poem using those 14 lines, using those words as your end words for the lines. And I would say you can put them in any order. We're not going to try to worry about a particular rhyme scheme for now. And if you're feeling overly constrained by this constraint, I encourage you to, metaphorically go off trail. So you could use words that are similar to, but not exactly the ones you were given, or you can write 14 sentences that use the word somewhere, but maybe not as end rhymes, right? So it's kind of thinking about how you can adapt it to make it work for you. So hopefully that made sense to anyone, everyone. Again, if you're unsure, you can drop a message in the chat or ask it in the room, and maybe Mike can pass it on to me. But we'll go for maybe 8 minutes to swap end rhymes and then write at least the beginning of this poem. And then maybe we'll take a couple of minutes if we have time to share out as well. But I'll set a timer for 8 minutes. Let me know if you have questions. And let's try some bourrime.
So Jennifer, swap and write the poem in the 8 minutes.
Yeah, swap
Okay.
rhymes and start writing the poem. Not expecting to finish.
How many?
Yeah, I know, I only have.
How many?
So they're not.
Can you tell us how to spell bourrime?
Yes, it is BOUT and then RIME with an accent over it. S.
Yeah.
And we are. Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Actually, like, so now we're. Yeah. And I agree. It's just like, I want the start early or.
Yeah, I should have known what to say. We're doing the rest of the room.
No. The board.
Oh, okay.
And I'm in.
Right, but I needed to see it.
I mean, I like that. And I said,
That's
was that little smaller?
Yeah.
Well, we got a big.
Yeah, so Trish went, she called the meeting. So like.
Yes, that's why.
And I don't know, what's the other side, I mean, let's see where
Yeah, definitely like a lot. You're looking down line, probably. Myself, but. Yeah.
Okay, I had no headaches.
You gotta read it.
I do. So, I don't want, I don't need to go, so. So. Oh, okay, so we'll see. Right now, good point, but I'll keep making sure that it. I think it's all about their work, because she said we don't have to get exactly what I said. Yeah, for a lot of them.
Tenses. So I went right to having a word test.
If they have to pay out, I mean.
And she said, all of them. Everybody swap all in one. Everybody swap. And so then she's ready for the program that she had, and basically sent it.
Oh, Joan.
So that's why there are so many.
So it's
errors.
and I asked for it.
So there's the fire that was sat next guy. Whoever's gonna do the proofreading, do the proofreading before it gets to you. So that the punctuation and everything is correct.
Yeah.
And then somebody can just look through in the format, because there was only one weird space that went down. You know how sometimes you put it in, there's only one word, you weird space that also put an arrow.
Yeah.
And you'll see that.
Good.
But I mean, there's.
But I think I think that was.
Yeah, so I just talked to her. You're prepared. She said she was ready. Sure thing. But it's like, I wish you had said. She has a program that was, editing. And she said not to edit, and I said, no, I was supposed to, like, I didn't change anybody's words or anything. The only thing I did is fix the punctuation. I wanted to do but I'm like, either.
Yeah. It was something in that might write in a little more. Or you grab.
It's just things that you miss when you're looking at it so much and you don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
Would you like to, you know, so where I say omit. I mean, they're really big way to fix it. It's like each one of these things just has like, here's, you know, comma here, take out a comma there. One had this random like colon that did not make sense. Just take it out, the rest of the stuff. So, but you're in common. Sometimes they periods. Like I just instead, someone said, he laughed. And he laughed. Like they just, some of the things they just said, okay, give me some.
You may like, did you take two, right?
Right.
I've got four, got your chairs and your hairs. Okay, and the good.
Oh, trust.
So I.
Then I would like somebody.
I have made a same thing, me, tree, past cat.
I don't like taking a look at, I mean, if you go through and fix the things that I said, I am like, how do you?
Yeah.
And,
She says it's not.
yes, probably. I've gone to travel and have.
She's gonna be on a plane.
Yeah.
Like, that's when it's beginning of the sentence.
Sitting in Seattle.
So that's a lot.
Like, it's a split screen, goes with that in the side.
I will say that yours would not have any service.
Yeah.
They're like, pretty portion of these notes. Okay.
And so about 7.
Yeah, I do.
Oh,
They said I'm there. I tried to give them hard. Right now, what was. If you have any questions, call me.
They didn't get that.
Oh.
Yeah, but it had.
Yeah. Like you said, you don't have to do another word, doesn't it?
And I forgot to tell you which cover. You can do whatever. I'm very honest to stay out of your house, stay out of it.
All right. Unbelievably, it has already been 8 minutes. If you're in the room, if you'd like to share a little bit with somebody next to you, maybe the person you swapped with, you can either share what you wrote or share a little bit of what that experience felt like. And same on the Zoom chat if you'd like to share. We'll just, again, take 2 or 3 minutes and then come back together and I'll close and we can have some Q&A time.
But I thought that it'd be nice to do it better, have goals and that. Right. You know, there's somebody's looking at all. Marking it outside. Yeah. Generational. Yeah. I should have done that. Was gonna be talking about an orange hair and then something. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. If you're in the library, if you can come back together.
I would love you.
Okay. Can you hear me in the library?
She's trying to get our attention.
All right, everybody,
Okay.
we're back.
All right. If you have questions about this form or kind of responses to how it went for you, I will have a little bit of Q&A time here in a minute. But I sort of attempted to write using some of the things that were shared in the chat, and it definitely led me to a kind of a reflective space, an image or a scene that I had not had in mind. And so just wanted to offer some gratitude for the folks in the chat who'd shared. But thinking about form and constraint more broadly, I guess to kind of close us here, I could go on and on. There are lots of other poetic forms that I've worked with and that I'm very fond of. But I do want to leave some time for Q&A. And before we get to your questions, I thought I'd close with a few guiding questions of my own that I've used when I've taught like semester-long classes on formal constraint. I used to teach a class with some regularity to college students, and sometimes they get so worried about following all the rules, quote unquote, correctly, that they'd miss out on the freedom that form can invite. And so what I'm going to share are the questions that I started sharing with them at the start of every semester, and then that we would return to every single class to keep us grounded in where I think the real, learning and growth and potential and constraint is. So these are my guiding questions for myself. What constraints are imposed on my writing by external forces, and what constraints do I choose to impose? What constraints are working for me, and what constraints are working against me? How can I use constraints not only for generation, but also for revision? What are my current writing habits, and what constraints might disrupt those habits? And where can I find freedom or disobedience or rebellion or other things that I value in constraint? And what constraints do I want to carry forward, and which do I want to abandon? So those are my guiding questions that I leave you with for the evening. And I appreciate you listening and playing along with some of these that may have felt new or difficult. And I'd love to hear some of your questions now.
Question.
Microphone's right here, so I think she could probably hear us if you just shout out.
Jennifer, right?
JP, I was wondering about the beautiful outlaw form. Do you come up with the title first, or do you start the poem and then work towards the title?
Yeah, I suppose it could be done the other way, but every time I've started it with a particular word as the title in mind, because then that gives me a pathway of which letters I'm excluding as I work through the different stanzas in the poem. And it also helps because then it's usually the thing that I'm trying to write about that uh, part of me is also trying to avoid. So like wanted to write a poem about my mother's death, and so I used the word ashes as the title. Or there's a poem about gun violence, and so I used the word guns as the title. And so it gave me a kind of entrance into those subjects to start with those and use it as a jumping off point.
Thank you.
Oh, we have to have more questions. Go ahead,
I just wanted to list all of her questions again. We can't write that fast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you give us the list of your constraint questions that you gave us again at the end?
Of course, yeah.
But a little slower so we can write them.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure. So the first questions are, what constraints are imposed on my writing by external forces? And what constraints do I choose to impose? That's one. And I'll drop these in the chat as well for folks who are on Zoom. And the second set of questions is, what constraints are working for me, and what constraints are working against me? And the third question is, how can I use constraints not only for generation, but also for revision? And the next set is, what are my current writing habits, and what constraints might disrupt those habits? And then the last ones are, where can I find freedom or other things that I value in constraint? And what constraints do I want to carry forward, and which do I want to abandon.
Other questions for Jennifer? Jennifer, can you tell us, give us a little bit of an overview of what you're gonna do on Saturday?
Sure. So the whole Saturday workshop will be devoted to other kinds of what you might think of as more extreme constraints or more unusual constraints. So we won't be necessarily focusing on some of the more common received forms, like some of the ones that I mentioned, like sonnets and villanelles. Instead, it will be some of these Oulipo forms that are either kind of more complicated or that have like a maybe mathematical aspect to them. I'll be sharing a couple different forms that I've either invented or that I've seen other writers invent that are maybe not very widely practiced. And so seeing what might come from constraints that we don't have a lot of examples for how to do it like correctly or right, because sometimes there's some freedom in that too. And then also there will be an invitation to invent some of our own forms and to exchange those with each other so that everybody there kind of comes away with, however many participants are in the room, that many new forms that they can try on their own too.
Can you talk a little bit about how this is beneficial to prose writers as well as poets?
Yeah. So I think a lot of even if you're not working with so maybe I'll put it this way. I think a lot of these forms, the benefits are less about the product of like producing a really finely crafted, beautiful outlaw, although that can feel great, and more about what habits it helps me to notice when I'm working in these forms. And so, especially when I was teaching this as a semester-long course, we would write in kind of open genre and try to find different ways to apply some of these things. Maybe, for instance, lipograms help us notice our habits around what word choices or what even letters or sounds we tend to be drawn to. And even prose writers are drawn to certain sounds, certain like habitual turns of phrase. And it really draws our attention to those things. So then those same prose writers know, okay, when I'm not using this constraint, I'm aware that these are my habits, and then I can choose to engage with them or not. So that's one aspect of it. And then there are, a number of constraints that both when I teach the class and in the sort of examples that I've used, they're drawn from prose writers who have kind of used it as a way to I sort of want to say walk the line between poetry and prose. I think one of the things that poetry often does is draw our attention to language as a kind of material object that we're constructing from, right? And in that sense, we're always working in constraint whenever we're writing because we're working with the limitations of an alphabet and the limitations of a page or a screen or whatever the structure is. And so I think working in prose constraints, prose can often feel like there are no constraints. And so working with some of these, it allows us to kind of remind ourselves, oh yeah, we're always working in constraints. And so, how can I do that with sort of more intention and more consciousness? And therefore, sort of more skillfulness in the way that I'm crafting my writing.
Can you spell that type of sonnet again, the bow removed? Can you spell that?
Yeah, the Burime is Bout, and I think there's a hyphen in between, and then Rime. E with an accent mark over it, and then an S.
Okay. Very cool. It was young. Okay, I got a new remake. I got it totally wrong. Noisy too. But now I know how it's pronounced from the previous stage where I saw it. I'll remember.
Any other questions? Any,
I think it kind of works both ways. Like, because you were I think it works both ways, because you were talking about how we notice the words that we use a lot and that we can't use because of the constraints. But it also helps us come up with brand new words because we're not using those other words. So it kind of gives us a broader idea. And I think that's one of the ways it can help us to write better prose, because we're kind of expanding our vision of, you know, what that looks like and how we're communicating outside of the box that we hadn't even realized we were writing in. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Absolutely. I think, some of these ones that focus on, diction and word choice definitely push it, push our lexicon, right? Like give us these other words that we have to reach for a little bit, right? And I think about some of the other constraints that I've seen folks use for prose in particular, where I think of one writer who he a beautiful writing, but it was always very ornate and like full of description. And so one of the constraints that I saw him work with was beginning a short story with a certain number of words in each sentence, and each sentence had to get one word shorter as it went. So by the end of the story, he couldn't use those kinds of like elaborate descriptions that he was used to using, and he had to find other ways to sort of achieve similar ends, but with different tools. And it was brilliant. And so I've enjoyed sort of seeing that kind of craft or technique piece too, just thinking about there's a form to prose as well, whether we think about it or not. And so it stretches us in that way too.
Were you always a poet, or, I mean, how do you describe yourself? And did you start your literary journey with the intention of being where you are now?
Yeah, I
Just an
thought of,
easy,
oh, go ahead.
just an easy question.
Yeah. I thought of myself pretty exclusively as a poet for a long time. Certainly when I was starting writing, that was my focus. It was just what I was most drawn to. And I think part of that was because it felt like it, especially once I started engaging with form, it felt like there was this way of approaching things that didn't feel quite as head on as I thought prose was. I've since learned that that's not necessarily true. And it was probably maybe about 10 years ago that I started focusing on prose and started writing actually like quite a bit of fiction and essays. And so that's maybe um, I would guess I pretty equally write in prose and in poetry now, and I've also started writing plays. So yeah, I've been drawn to partially because I started trying to think about how I could apply some of these practices that I use in poetry to other genres as well, and didn't see them as these discrete and separate things that I think I used to believe that they were. It's kind of opened some doors for me, and so now I just mostly call myself a writer, and feel like that's maybe more apt.
but
What do I do?
just say your question.
Oh, just talk?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I noticed in what you wrote, the poem that you read to us, that you used extremely long lines. So I was wondering what you hear regarding meter. Like when you think about meter, do you think in long lines like that, or exactly how does it come across? And what kind of rhythms and tempos And what kind of music do you hear?
Hmm. Yeah, it it really varies so much from poem to poem. I think I do notice that many of those beautiful outlaw poems, the ones written in that form, tend to have longer lines. I think, and this is maybe me, sort of psychoanalyzing myself, but I think because um, I felt so constrained by the sort of rules of the game, so to speak, that I used the meter and the line length as a way to kind of feel some expansiveness to counteract that sort of like closed in sort of feeling that the constraint can sometimes give. But in many of my other poems, my line length is much shorter. It's I think one of my more natural cadences in poems is closer to like iambic pentameter. Maybe just because I've read it so often and it's sort of worked its way into myself, but also because I think there's um, a sort of natural rhythm to my own body and my own breath length and things like that that feel sort of more in line with that kind of way of scanning or thinking about music in a poem. So when I do work in these poems that have much longer lines, I tend to uh, shift between longer and shorter sentences within those long lines to kind of create some of that tension or mimic some of those differences in kinds of ways of pausing and taking a breath or otherwise incorporating a kind of difference in how one might read those lines so that it doesn't always feel like it's quite so expansive, but can kind of move back and forth between um, something that's feels sort of compressed and tidy and something that feels bigger.
And then what poets do you hear in the, like, when you, when you, in your mind, what kind of poets are back there? Like, for example, I'm bilingual, so I listen to Garcia Lorca. In other words, I hear him. I also hear a poet that nobody likes called Gungara, who is incredibly sensual. He's a siglo de oro poet. Actually, there are a lot of people who like him, but anyway. And I hear Chaucer, that is, I have Chaucer in the back of my head. He's the only poet who can write narrative poetry in English that rhymes, that I like. Um, which is amazing to me. Who do you hear?
Oh gosh, that's such an interesting question. I I the first few that came to mind were like very readily Whitman and Dickinson, I think, because both of them have such a large body of work that I was introduced to very early and that became a kind of model for me of this tension between the expansive and the compressed. And I think I've often been interested in sort of working with the tension between those two things. So I know that those two are always there. And then I think also about Elizabeth Bishop, I think has has worked her way into me in a lot of ways. I think because she also I think was very endeared to form and especially to meter and syllabics, and which is also something that, especially in nonce forms, when I'm sort of creating my own, is something that I often work with. And then I think some of the others who really kind of sit with me, I think Rilke, Cavafy, Neruda, I think those were maybe Ingeborg Bachmann, Yehuda Amichai. I think there are lots of poets that, again, I was introduced to fairly early and that I just sort of devoured their work, read everything I could find by them. And I think I often, especially as a younger poet, read all of their writing out loud so I could get a feel for how it affected me. And most of it was in translation in English. So how sort of those translations affected me. And so I hear maybe not exactly them, but I hear their translations often when I'm writing.
All right, we have passed 7 o'clock. Big round of applause for Jennifer.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. And we are, I am looking forward to meeting you in person on Saturday. As I said, there are spaces available for that workshop still. Sign up soon before they all disappear. And those of us in the room are gonna stay here, and I think we're gonna have a Caribbean dance party tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Amanda's gonna lead that. And those of you at home could just dance on your couch, and we'll see y'all next month. Okay,
Thanks so much.
thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
See you
Thank
Saturday.
you. Take care, everybody.
Start.
So yeah,